Summary of the problems the suspect faces while entering prison in Sudan. 1. Brutal interrogation. The first ordeal is facing highly trained police interrogators whose sole aim is to extract confessions. They use ruthless techniques learned abroad, beating suspects severely without leaving visible marks or causing death. This stage is described as harsher than historical inquisitions or terrorist brutality. 2. Corrupt medical examination. After interrogation, suspects are sent to doctors for fitness checks. In reality, doctors often declare them fit for imprisonment without proper examination. If the suspect's family is wealthy and willing to pay bribes, the doctors may declare the suspect unfit, allowing hospitalization instead. 3. Harsh prison conditions. Suspects often remain on remand for over a year without basic necessities like soap, shoes, or uniforms. These must be provided by family. Sleeping arrangements are dire. The worst spots are near filthy toilets with overwhelming stench. The prison is infested with flies during the day and mosquitoes at night, making rest nearly impossible. 4. Overcrowding and violence. Cells are overcrowded, forcing detainees to stand for hours. Many inmates are injured, bleeding, or unconscious from beatings. Female suspects endure additional abuse, rape, including humiliation and physical assault during arrest and detention. 5. Psychological torment. The environment is dehumanizing. Prisoners are surrounded by filth, blood-stained clothes, and mentally unstable inmates. Fear of further violence and extortion by other prisoners adds to the mental strain. In short, the suspect's entry into Gaddarf prison is marked by systemic brutality, corruption, physical suffering, and psychological trauma, reflecting a deeply oppressive penal system. Excerpts from the novel about the problems the suspect faces when entering prison in Gaddarf City. Following in the footsteps of our tragic tale, we are now about to enter a place that no one wants to enter except by coercion from the powerful arm of the law enforcement police officers. The evil old man Mr. Osman Al-Taib, the notorious criminal the magician Omar, who is half-brother of Farida, Intisar, Firdas, Osman, and Badriya. The beautiful nurse Zakia are captured by Sergeant Abdul Nabi and 4 brave police officers. Then they were taken to the dungeon and thrown behind bars. Before we go there and find out what happened to the 3 suspects, we must tell the reader some important information that we have collected about Al-Gaddarf Central Prison. Whether the suspect is innocent or guilty, he will face the following problems inside Sudanese prisons. When the suspect is arrested, the first problem he will face is the police interrogators. These are well-trained police officers whose primary duty is to extract the truth from the suspect. They were trained to strike him on every part of his body without spilling a drop of blood or killing him. We are told that these heartless interrogators have been trained in all kinds of ruthless interrogation techniques in Italy and then mastered all the brutality of the world mafia gang. They are much tougher than the Spanish Inquisitors and Russian Gestapo, the terrorists of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and the Nazi genocide war criminals of Adolf Hitler. After that, the suspect is handed over to the doctors to check whether he is fit to be imprisoned or not. Any suspect who narrowly escapes a brutal beating by police interrogators is supposed to be declared unfit for prison and should be sent to the intensive care unit at the nearest hospital. Yet the doctors, without examining him, would declare him fit for imprisonment. The reason for this is that the corrupt doctors will appear to be compromising with the suspect's family. If the suspect happens to be from a wealthy family and his family members are willing to pay what they demand, they will re-examine his state of health and declare him unfit for imprisonment. In this case, he will spend most of his sentence in the hospital. After these doctors, the suspect must confront the prison guards. These guards do the least evil to the suspect. Their main task is to pickpocket the suspect for every valuable thing that happened to be with him when he was arrested. For example, if he has some cash, a nice watch, a gold chain, or other jewelry, and a nice shirt, pants, or shoes, the guards will confiscate these items. The suspect will not take it back later whether he is declared innocent, guilty, or ever seen again. The suspect would then be dragged or carried away by the guards and thrown into a dormitory. Now the suspect has reached the end of his journey from the free world to the dungeon world. The problems the suspect faces with the bodyguards inside Gaddarov prison are severe and multifaceted. 1. Extortion and violence. The bodyguards operate like a criminal gang, offering protection services in exchange for money. If the suspect's family refuses to pay, the suspect is mercilessly beaten day and night. This creates a constant threat of physical abuse and psychological terror. 2. Brutal living conditions. The suspect is forced to sleep in overcrowded dorm with 200 to 300 prisoners without basic necessities such as beds, sheets, mattresses, or pillows. Nights are plagued by mosquitoes and other insects, while days are filled with flies, making the environment unhygienic and unbearable. The worst sleeping spots are near filthy toilets, where the stench of urine and feces permeates the air. Cleaners avoid these areas out of fear of violent inmates, so sanitation is virtually non-existent. 3. Gang control and continuous threat. Inside the prison, the bodyguards, who are usually gang members, maintain dominance through harassment, extortion, and smuggling of contraband. Their influence ensures that suspects remain vulnerable unless they comply with their demands. Excerpts about the problems the suspect faces with the bodyguards and harsh conditions inside the Sudanese prison. Among the suspects and prisoners there are those who call themselves bodyguards. I hope that no one reading this story will be deceived by the good reputation that the prison bodyguards call themselves. These guards are criminals and do criminal acts. It is these criminals who have been tried and convicted. Most of them are serving life sentences or on death row while awaiting their turn to be executed by hanging, beheading, or stoning. So, they lost all hope in life and their hearts turned to stone. They are tougher than police interrogation. They don't care if their victim dies at their hands. When the guards bring a new suspect inside the dorm, these bodyguards beat him mercilessly. Then they will inquire about his crime. If his charge is related to money, he will be the object of their interest as long as he is in prison. For example, bodyguards favor crimes such as income tax, social deception by a lawyer or witch doctor, murder, kidnapping, rape, robbery, drug trafficking, violence against women, child abuse, and bribery. With their agents out of jail, the bodyguards will make a deal with the suspect's family. If the family refuses to pay for their protection service, the suspect will be mercilessly beaten day and night. In addition to the bodyguards, the suspect will face the problem of sleeping in the dorm. Each dorm would be packed with 200 to 300 suspected and convicted prisoners. No bed, sheet, mattress, or pillow is allowed inside the dorm. Besides, the suspect must spend the night with the biting of the mosquitoes and other vampire insects. Inside the prison, there are millions of flies during the day and billions of mosquitoes at night. The last problem the suspect faces at night is when he sleeps. There are good places and bad places to sleep. The bad place is near the toilet, where the suspect has to spend his time in jail inhaling the smell of urine and feces that spread a foul odor of dirty toilets in prison. The washrooms are dirty as hell. The cleaners are afraid to death to enter the prison and clean the washrooms for fear of dangerous criminals. The prisoners were divided into suspects and convicts. Convicts are prisoners who have been tried, convicted, and sentenced to prison, while the suspects are the ones who are in pretrial detention. Sometimes the suspect spends more than a year on remand. During this long waiting period, the accused is not entitled to obtain a prisoner uniform, shoes, soap, toothbrush, toothpaste, tea, or coffee from the prison authority. It is the responsibility of his family to provide him with these necessities of life. If he happens to be unemployed, an outcast, or a beggar who has no one to take care of him outside the prison, he will remain as long as he is in the pretrial stage without these basic needs of life. In addition, the new suspects will be forced to sleep with suspects who have not showered, washed their clothes, or brushed their teeth in several months. Problems faced by suspects in Sudanese prisons. Suspects and detainees encounter systemic abuses and violations of rights. Arbitrary detention and lack of due process. Many individuals are held without formal charges or legal oversight, sometimes indefinitely. Families are often not informed of their whereabouts. Torture and ill treatment. Reports detail frequent beatings, electrocution, and psychological abuse. Sexual violence against women detainees has been documented, along with forced labor in some facilities. Ethnic profiling and discrimination. People from Darfur, Kordofan, and certain African tribes face harsher treatment, including targeted torture and ill treatment based on perceived affiliations. Children in detention. Children as young as 13 are detained alongside adults, and some are even used as guards. Others live in prison with their mothers without access to basic needs like milk and diapers. Enforced disappearances and deaths. Many detainees die from disease or neglect, and bodies are sometimes left in cells or dumped without proper burial rites. Problems women face in Sudan. Comparison between real-world scenarios and the novel already explores themes like forced marriage, obedience verdicts, apostasy, and systemic gender oppression. Here's a structured expansion with concrete parallels. 1. Forced marriage and guardianship. Novel context. Intisar and Firdaus are married off without consent under Sharia guardianship laws. Real world. Sudan and Saudi Arabia. Male guardians can marry off women without consent. Case. Rahaf Muhammad fled Saudi Arabia in 2019 fearing forced marriage, sought asylum in Canada. 2. House of Obedience. Novel context. Women refusing marital submission are taken to the House of Obedience. Real world. Egypt and Sudan. Courts enforce Beit Altai rulings. Women lose financial rights or face imprisonment. 3. Apostasy and death penalty. Novel context. Later in the novel, Intisar faces execution for converting to Christianity. Real world. Sudan. Apostasy punishable by death. Case. Miriam Ibrahim sentenced to death in 2014 for apostasy. Global outcry saved her. 4. Gender-based violence. Novel context. FGM, marital rape, honor killings. Real world. FGM, 87% prevalence in Sudan, UNICEF. Honor killings. Pakistan reports 1,000+ cases annually. Marital rape, legal in many Sharia-based systems. 5. Refugee exploitation. Novel context. Intisar flees Sudan, faces dangers en route to Canada. Real world. Sudanese refugees. UNHCR reports sexual violence during border crossings. Syrian and Afghan women. Similar patterns of trafficking and abuse. 6. Religious hypocrisy and corruption. Novel context. Clerics justify forced marriage while exploiting women. Real world. Iraq, Iran, Nigeria, and Pakistan. Clerics run halal mutah marriage rings, profiting from temporary marriages. 7. Psychological impact. Novel context. Trauma, suicidal ideation among victims. Real world. South Asia and Middle East. NGOs report PTSD and depression among women in forced marriages. Key insight. These scenarios show the novel's fictional events mirror systemic patterns globally, where patriarchal norms weaponize religion and law to control women. Here's a concise synthesis of the key parallels between the novel and real-world contexts based on the text. 1. Patriarchal control and gender inequality. Novel. Women treated as property. Forced marriages arranged by male guardians. Verdict of obedience allows police to drag wives to House of Obedience. Real world. Similar practices exist in Sudan and other Islamic societies. Male guardianship, obedience laws, and denial of women's autonomy. 2. Religious and legal oppression. Novel. Sharia courts enforce obedience, citing Quranic verses and hadith. Apostasy punishable by death. Real world. Sudanese law historically criminalized apostasy and upheld male authority in marriage, divorce, and inheritance. 3. Violence against women. Novel. Kidnapping, rape, torture, and honor killings depicted as systemic. Real world. Gender-based violence, FGM, and honor killings remain prevalent in Muslim societies, often justified by tradition or religion. 4. social norms and honor culture. Novel Love Before Marriage condemned. Women risk ostracism and violence for defiance. Real world. Premarital relationships and female autonomy are heavily stigmatized in many patriarchal cultures. 5. Corruption and abuse of power. Novel. Religious leaders and elites manipulate laws for personal gain, bribery and collusion rampant. Real world. Corruption in judiciary and law enforcement perpetuates injustice. Powerful men exploit legal loopholes. 6. Refugee crisis and escape. Novel. Intisar's later flight to Ethiopia and Canada mirrors real refugee struggles, border dangers, asylum challenges. Real world. Thousands flee Sudan and similar regions to escape forced marriage and persecution. 7. Psychological impact. Novel. Trauma, shame, and suicidal ideation among women subjected to systemic abuse. Real world. Mental health crises common among victims of gender-based violence and legal injustice. 8. Resistance and advocacy. Novel. Characters defy oppressive norms, seek secular courts, and fight for autonomy. Real world. Women's rights activists globally face similar risks while challenging patriarchal laws. Core insight. The novel acts as a social critique, reflecting real-world issues of legalized misogyny, religious extremism, systemic corruption, and cultural oppression, while highlighting universal struggles for justice, dignity, and freedom. Here's a comparative table aligning major novel events from the Verdict of Obedience against the Disobedient Muslim Wife with their real-world parallels or cases. Comparative table: Novel events versus real cases. Theme/event. Novel event, fictional. Real case/practice. Forced marriage and guardianship. Intisar and Firdaus married off without consent. Imam validates marriage citing Quran and Sunnah. Sudanese Sharia law allows male guardian, wali, to marry off women without consent, documented in Sudanese courts. Verdict of Obedience, Beit Altai. Sharia court issues obedience verdict. Firdaus dragged by police to House of Obedience. Real mechanism in Sudan and Egypt. Courts enforce obedience rulings. Women forcibly returned to husbands. Child marriage justified by hadith. Firdaus, 15, married to Osman, 70. Judges cite Prophet's marriage to Aisha. Child marriage legal under Sudanese personal status law. Jurisprudence cites same precedent. Marital rape and beating. Firdaus raped repeatedly under legal cover, starvation used as punishment. Marital rape not criminalized in Sudan. Quran, Surah 4, verse 34 invoked to justify wife beating. Apostasy trial and death sentence. Intisar sentenced to stoning and hanging for converting to Christianity. Real cases. Miriam Ibrahim, 2014, sentenced to death for apostasy under Sudanese law. Gang rape and police corruption. Mona kidnapped and gang raped. Inspector accepts bribe to release rapist. Documented cases of gang rape and bribery in Sudan. Systemic impunity reported by HRW and Amnesty International. Female genital mutilation, FGM. Detailed depiction of FGM as cultural norm. World Health Organization reports greater than 85% prevalence of FGM in Sudan, justified by prophetic hadiths and religious interpretations. Honor-based violence. Threats of stoning and killing for resisting marriage or alleged immorality. UN reports confirm honor killings and violence against women in Sudan and other Islamic societies. Escape and refugee journey. Intisar flees Sudan, crosses jungle, seeks asylum in Canada via a UN intervention. Real refugee pathways documented by UNHCR. Thousands of Sudanese women escape gender-based persecution. Witchcraft and social manipulation. Hajj Muhammad uses black magic to sabotage love and enforce marriage. Witch doctors and occult practices influence social decisions in Sudan. Widely reported phenomenon. Key insights. Novel events mirror systemic realities, Forced marriage, obedience verdicts, and apostasy trials are grounded in documented Sudanese law and practice. Institutionalized violence, legal frameworks, and cultural norms legitimize abuse, aligning with reports by Amnesty International, HRW, and UN. Symbolic spaces, House of Obedience, prisons, represent actual mechanisms of patriarchal control. Refugee narrative reflects real escape routes for persecuted women from Sudan to Ethiopia and Canada. Here's a concise summary of the arrest of the three suspects: Mr. Osman Al-Taib, Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir, and Nurse Zakia Karamalla based on the text. Context and targets. The police raid was an urgent emergency operation authorized to use brutality and lethal force if necessary, as the suspects were considered extremely dangerous. Targets of arrest. Mr. Osman Al-Taib, described as the evil old man, accused of bribery, collusion, and later implicated in kidnapping, rape, and murder. Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir, referred to as the magician, heavily implicated in heinous crimes including kidnapping and rape. Nurse Zakia Karamalla, Osman's private nurse and secretary, charged as an accessory for failing to prevent abuse and starvation of a victim. The raid and capture. Led by Sergeant Abdul Nabi with 4 officers, the team stormed the suspect's location. Orders were clear: suspects could be beaten, restrained, or even killed if resistance occurred. All 3 were captured, tied up, and taken to a police wagon amid a crowd that gathered to witness the arrest of these notorious figures. Sergeant Muhammad Abdul Nabi slapped Mr. Osman Al-Taib because of a misunderstanding during the transfer to jail. The sergeant asked Osman whether he had bribed Inspector Hussein to release the magician criminal. Due to severe injuries to his lips, Osman could not respond verbally. The sergeant interpreted his silence as defiance and a challenge to his authority, which enraged him. In reaction, he slapped Osman with full force, causing him to fall over. He even attempted to kick Osman, but a nurse intervened to stop further violence. Here's a summary of the nurse's intervention during the transfer, based on the text. Identity and role. The nurse involved was Zakia Karamalla, Osman's private nurse. Initially, her role was to provide medical care, but it evolved into complicity and abuse. Initial medical intervention. Zakia treated Osman's severe lips injuries after his wife Fergus bit him during a violent clash. She stitched his torn lips and bandaged them, acting in her professional capacity. Collusion and transfer. Later, Zakia collaborated with Osman and Harun to move Fergus to a rented apartment. During this transfer, Fergus was restrained and starved, and Zakia ignored her deteriorating health. Critical decision. When Fergus's condition worsened, Zakia persuaded Harun to call an ambulance. Fergus was admitted to ICU and remained in a prolonged coma. Legal aftermath. Zakia was charged as an accessory due to her involvement in the transfer and neglect, but was ultimately acquitted. Her actions highlight the tension between professional ethics and complicity under coercion. Key themes. Zakia's intervention oscillated between care and complicity, starting as a healer but becoming an enabler of systemic abuse and patriarchal control. Mr. Osman Al-Taib faced several serious difficulties during his transfer to jail because of his lips condition. Inability to speak. After being bitten by his wife Fergus, his lips were severely swollen and stitched. His doctor had strictly warned him not to talk for at least 10 days. This made verbal communication impossible, forcing him to rely on writing and gestures, which often led to misunderstandings during interrogation. Dietary restrictions and physical weakness. He was forbidden to chew food or taste it with his tongue and had to survive on liquids. This restriction weakened him physically, adding to his vulnerability during detention. Police brutality and misinterpretation. During interrogation, when he could not respond verbally, officers assumed he was being uncooperative or even deaf. This misunderstanding led to violent slaps and beatings, worsening his injuries. Severe health consequences in prison. While detained, he was brutally beaten by gang members and trampled during riots. These assaults left him with broken ribs, a fractured skull, and permanent disability. He eventually fell into a prolonged coma in the ICU for more than a week. Excerpts about the transfer of the 3 suspects to jail. After this brief introduction, it is now time for us to follow in the footsteps of the 2 evil criminals who were caught in Badria's house by 5 policemen and took them by force and threw them inside the cell. Therefore, after the course of our story, we must now enter the central prison of Gadaref City to see what happened to Mr. Osman Al-Taib, Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir, and the nurse, Zakia Karamala. At first, the beautiful nurse was mistaken by the neighbors for a high-ranking prostitute whom the dirty old man had brought with him to spend the night in his arms. Therefore, when she appeared in her short dress and half-exposed sexy body, the audience cursed her with many insults and accusations. Some bad teen boys reached out to her body and groped her and did other ugly things to her big ass. They would have gang-raped her in broad daylight had it not been for the 5 policemen who used their batons and scared them away and rescued her. After that, Sergeant Muhammad Abdul Nabi and his 4 policemen took the 3 suspects to the police headquarters. The novel explains that journalist Shams El-Din was actively photographing the suspects during their transfer to police headquarters. He captured them. Individually. 2 by 2. Collectively. With others. Specific examples include multiple shots of Osman Al-Taib, like hiding in the toilet, being thrown into the wagon, taken out of the wagon, and slapped by Sergeant Muhammad Abdul Nabi. Additionally, Shams filmed Omar in various locations, and there were at least 4 separate pictures showing Mona attacking Omar, slapping, kicking, hitting him with her high heel, and spitting on his face. Although the text does not give an exact numeric total, the descriptions indicate at least 10 distinct photos, several of Osman in different situations, 4 of Omar being assaulted, and group/individual shots of all 3 suspects. Excerpts about pictures taken by the journalist. On the way, the journalist Shams El-Din was busy taking pictures for his newspaper. He photographed the suspects in a variety of ways and in different situations. He took their photos individually, 2 by 2, collectively, and with others. Mr. Osman Al-Taib was filmed when he was found hiding inside the toilet, with his hands tied while he was kneeling between the nurse and the magician, when he was taken by 2 policemen and thrown into the police wagon, and when he was taken out of the wagon and thrown into the lockup room. Another picture shows Mr. Osman Al-Taib when Sergeant Muhammad Abdul Nabi slapped him. There was a misunderstanding between the sergeant and the old geezer. The former asked the latter if he had bribed Inspector Hussein and thus released the criminal magician Omar. The old man, because of the disease of his bitten lips, could not answer the question. The sergeant regarded the old man's silence as a challenge to his authority. In accordance, he slapped him with all his might until the old goat turned upside down. Sergeant Muhammad Abdul Nabi was about to kick the old hyena with his shoe, had it not been for the nurse's intervention. The secretary Zakia remained loyal to her evil employer even after his arrest and continued to defend him and speak on his behalf until they reached the detention. The 2 male criminals were sent to the men's jail, and the female suspect was sent to the women's detention. Since that time, the vile old man has lost contact with his female mouthpiece. Despite this, Sergeant Muhammad Abdul Nabi had asked journalist Tariq Shams al-Din Haddad not to publish that photo in the newspaper, which shows him slapping the old geezer with all his might. Based on the text, Mona's reaction when she sees Omar arrested in his house is intense and visceral. Immediate response, Mona screams loudly, identifying Omar as one of her kidnappers and rapists. Physical reaction, she lashes out violently, kicking, slapping, and even spitting in his face. Emotional state, her behavior reflects overwhelming rage and a thirst for justice, so much so that the police have to pull her away to prevent her from killing him. This scene underscores Mona's trauma and her determination to retaliate against her abuser when given the chance. It's a moment of catharsis for her, but also one charged with raw emotion and physical aggression. Mona froze as the words sank in, her breath catching like a fragile thread about to snap. A storm of disbelief and indignation surged through her veins, flushing her cheeks with heat. Her eyes darted across the room, searching for something, anything, that could anchor her in this sudden chaos. The walls seemed to close in, their familiar contours now oppressive, and the hum of distant voices blurred into a hollow roar. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, as if pain could steady the tempest raging inside. Every fiber of her being screamed against the injustice, yet her voice faltered, trapped between the urge to cry out and the weight of stunned silence. In that moment, Mona felt both fiercely alive and utterly powerless, a soul caught in the cruel grip of fate. Sight. Mona sees in that moment. Her eyes darted to the dimly lit room, shadows stretching like accusing fingers across the walls. Sound. The sharp crack of the door echoed in her ears, louder than her own pounding heartbeat. Touch. Convey physical sensations. Her palms prickled with cold sweat, and the rough weave of her scarf scratched against her neck. Smell. The acrid scent of burnt incense clung to the air, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. Taste. A bitter dryness coated her tongue, as if every word she wanted to speak had turned to dust. Excerpts about the reaction of the first innocent girl when she sees her kidnapper and rapist, the magician Omar. Shams el-Din also filmed the sixth criminal, the magician Omar, in various locations. Mona refused to approve 4 of her photos. She asked the journalist not to show those photos to the public. But she requested him to give her those 4 photos so that she could keep them in her own album. The pictures showed the first innocent girl taking revenge on her kidnapper and rapist. One of the pictures was taken when she slapped him in the face, another when she kicked him on the head, another when she hit him with her heel on the back, and the last when she was spitting in his face. When the group reached the police headquarters, they found that Inspector Hussein was in charge. However, the sergeant and his policemen refused to greet him or speak to him. They also refused to hand over the suspects to him. They demanded that Inspector Yassin, assistant to Inspector Hussein, take over the case and file a complaint against him. There is an old enmity and hatred between Inspector Yassin and Inspector Hussein. The enmity and hatred worsened when Inspector Hussein the Great achieved his final victory by arresting Al-Wash and his gang. Therefore, when Inspector Yassin learned of Inspector Hussein's involvement in the crime of bribery and rape, he immediately informed his superiors of the matter. The text specifies that the senior officials of the police department instructed Inspector Yassin to take the following steps against Inspector Hussein. Strip him of his police uniform immediately. Charge him with bribery and corruption. Suspend him from working as a police inspector. Imprison him at the headquarters until further orders are issued. Inspector Yassin immediately carried out the above orders against the suspected Inspector Hussein. After that, he took the statements of the good citizen Walid Hamza and the first innocent girl Mona Salah al-Din and allowed them to leave and return to their homes. Nurse Sakia was interrogated and released when the police discovered that she was not involved in the rape and bribery crimes. She went straight from the police headquarters to the airport and flew to her home city, Khartoum. The interrogation of Mr. Osman Al-Taib and the magician Omar by the police extortionists. The scene takes place in a cramped police interrogation room, described as barely larger than a phone booth. The elderly man, portrayed as cruel and unrepentant, is handcuffed in a painful position and left in complete darkness for half an hour. Initially, he believes this is punishment for his crimes and fears dying in this state. His mind becomes haunted by thoughts of ghosts, contrasting sharply with his former luxurious lifestyle filled with wealth and comfort. Despite his suffering, he does not repent for his past misdeeds, including assaults on innocent victims. Suddenly, a blinding light causes severe pain in his eyes, likened to burning flames and chilly powder. While he struggles helplessly, unknown individuals forcibly strip him of his clothing, intensifying his humiliation and torment. Here are the excerpts from the text that describe the interrogations of Mr. Osman Al-Taib by the police in the interrogation room. 1. Initial detention and abuse. Mr. Osman Al-Taib was filmed when he was found hiding inside the toilet, with his hands tied while kneeling between the nurse and the magician. He was taken by 2 policemen and thrown into the police wagon, then into the lockup room. Another picture shows Sergeant Muhammad Abdul Nabi slapping him. The sergeant asked if he had bribed Inspector Hussein to release the magician criminal. Because of a disease in his bitten lips, Osman could not answer. The sergeant regarded his silence as defiance and slapped him so hard that the old man turned upside down. He was about to kick him with his shoe had it not been for the nurse's intervention. 2. Formal interrogation. Later, instead of tying him up, they made the old man sit on a chair and gave him paper and a pencil. One interrogator asked, "Do you admit that you bribed Police Inspector Hussein Hassan Hassanain and thus helped the criminal Omar Mustafa Jabir escape from prison?" Osman wrote, "I asked Inspector Hussein to release him for 3 days only because I needed him to testify before Judge Abdul Mohsen Taha in the Sharia court in Gadaref City regarding my dispute with the family of my fourth wife, who is his sister Firdous Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir." When his response was read aloud, another interrogator slapped him so hard that the old man, the chair, and the table turned upside down. The question was repeated, but Osman did not reply. The tough cop assumed he had become temporarily deaf from the slap. 3. Severe beating and torture. His body was severely beaten by the police interrogators. He was arrested and beaten by Gadaref police during his interrogation. An official medical report stated that he remained in a comatose state in the ICU for several days due to the violence. The report also noted that he was trampled during riots and became lame for life. These passages illustrate the brutality and humiliation Osman al-Taib endured during police interrogations, including physical violence, forced written confessions, and prolonged torture leading to permanent injuries. Narrative recap: The Magician Omar's interrogation. The room was stark and silent, save for the hum of the overhead light. Omar sat rigid in the metal chair, his hands clasped tightly on the table as though holding on to something unseen. Across from him, the investigator leaned forward, voice calm but edged with authority. "Start from the beginning," the investigator said. Omar's eyes flickered, searching for an escape in the blank walls. His words came slowly at first, halting as if each syllable carried weight. He spoke of the night in question, the hurried footsteps, the whispered exchanges, the decisions made under pressure. Every detail was scrutinized, every pause met with a question that cut deeper. As the hours stretched on, the tone shifted. The investigator pressed harder, weaving contradictions into a net Omar could not untangle. Sweat traced lines down his temple, betraying the calm he tried to maintain. His voice rose, then faltered, until finally the truth slipped through, fragmented admissions that painted a picture no longer in his favor. When the session ended, Omar remained seated, staring at the table as if it held the remnants of his resolve. The door closed behind the investigators, leaving the echo of unanswered questions in the sterile air. Here are the excerpts from the text that describe the interrogations of the magician Omar by the police in the interrogation room. Arrival and initial brutality. The 2 prison guards did not heed his cries. In this inhuman way, the criminal Omar was dragged for 6 minutes until they reached the police interrogator's room. After that, they handcuffed him, turned off the lights, and left. The magician Omar, being a jailbird as a habitual goon, knew what would come next. So his mind became busy devising some tricks to escape from the harsh beatings of the investigators. Interrogation begins. Half an hour later, he heard people's footsteps entering the darkened room. Turn on the sharp light with Omar's eyes closed. He started opening them gradually until he saw the ruthless interrogators standing in front of him like death demons. His main concern is to avoid trick questions. But they surprised him with an unexpected question: why did you escape from prison? The first question is too tricky for Omar to answer correctly. Violence and threats. His body was severely beaten by the police interrogators. Overcoming the shock, Inspector Hussein said, "You had a natural dislike of police uniforms. Not because of your police uniform, but because of the unexpected visitor who came here last night." Here are the key points from Omar's interrogation based on the text. 1. Setting and initial treatment. Omar was dragged brutally by 2 prison guards for 6 minutes to the interrogation room, ignoring his cries. The room was tiny and dark, with lights turned off after he was handcuffed, creating a tomb-like atmosphere. This harsh treatment was intended to intimidate him before questioning. 2. Psychological state. Omar, described as a habitual criminal and magician, anticipated torture and tried to devise tricks to avoid severe beatings. He kept his eyes closed until interrogators switched on a sharp light, confronting him like death demons. 3. Interrogation questions. The first question was, "Why did you escape from prison?" which Omar found tricky. His initial answer, Inspector Hussein told him to go home because someone asked for his release. Investigators were dissatisfied, leading to brutal beatings. 4. Torture and coercion. Omar endured extreme physical pain, worse than previous beatings of the old man Osman al-Taib, due to his frail condition. After 10 minutes of torture, the question was repeated. Under duress, Omar confessed. His younger sister's husband, Mr. Osman al-Taib, bribed Inspector Hussein for his release. He was involved in heinous crimes, kidnapping, and rape. 5. Themes highlighted. Corruption and collusion. Law enforcement and elites conspired to protect criminals. Moral conflict. Omar resisted full confession, but was forced through violence. Power dynamics. Interrogators used fear, darkness, and physical abuse to extract information. Excerpts about the interrogation of Mr. Osman al-Taib by the police extortionists. The police interrogation room is slightly larger than a public telephone booth. There is a small chair and a table. The 2 police guards brought in the evil old man and handcuffed him in 2 corners. The old fox has become like the crucified criminal in the Islamic State Caliphate of ISIS. Then they turned off the lights and left. The small room became as dark as a tomb. For half an hour, the old hyena is left hanging in this position. At first, he thought it was a punishment for his crime. He hoped this punishment wouldn't be long. He is afraid that he will die hanging like a chicken on a rope. Then he heard that the door to the room was opened and the sounds of the footprints of some creatures entered. He tried to see who entered, but he couldn't. His troubled mind told him that the room was a haunted place full of ghosts. Such a thought terrified the old man, who was not used to such darkness. Outside prison, his life was full of lights and fun. He used to spend his time in beautiful villas, mansions, 5-star hotels in foreign countries and fly by planes from one country to another in business class. When the old geezer remembered the outside world, he started to shed hot tears. However, the rapist old geezer did not remember the evils he had committed against the second innocent girl Firdaus and did not repent of his many evil deeds. While the old man was hanging in that miserable state, he suddenly saw a sharp light focus on his eyes. He experienced severe pain in his eyes. He felt like a scorching flame ignited in his eyes. He tried to close them, but it felt like they were filled with hot chili powder. He pulled his hands to protect his eyes, but he couldn't free them from the ropes. As he struggled with his eyes and hands, he felt some rough hands grab his jacket, shirt, and trousers and strip them all from his body. He then heard a loud voice asking him, "Did you bribe Inspector Hussein to acquit the criminal Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir of his involvement in the crime of kidnapping and rape?" The old man, though trembling with fear, remained silent with his mouth shut. The harsh voice repeated the question 3 times, but the old man did not answer. After that, he felt as if a sharp sword or electric shock had cut his stomach and split it into 2 halves. The pain was so terrible that the old fox tried to open his mouth and scream, but this also caused great pain in his diseased lips. Tears flowed from his eyes. He felt another heavy blow to his stomach, followed by a kick and a slap. At least 3 people continued to beat the old wolf continuously for 10 minutes. Each of them focused on one part of his body. One specialized in slapping, the other in kicking, and the other in caning. The 3rd investigator focused on the cheeks, ears, mouth, and head. Therefore, he caused more pain than the others. The other 2 interrogators divided the rest of the body between them into 2 equal parts. 10 minutes later, they stopped at the same time. The old man felt as if his body was set on fire. Every member of his body was burning with unbearable pain. Once again, he heard the harsh voice asking him the same question. His heart longed for the beautiful nurse, Sakia. In that unbearable torture, he remembered the second innocent girl, Firdaus. How she suffered unbearable pain when he brutally raped her. He understood that God is punishing him for the evil he did to her. However, the evil old man did not repent of his sins. When the question was repeated 3 times and the old hyena could not answer it, the beating resumed again. It continued for another 10 long minutes. When they stopped, the old man felt his body float on molten lava of an erupted volcano. One of the police interrogators said, "I think this old wolf is deaf and his mouth has gone dumb. Let's try with him another time." Therefore, he turned off the sharp light and the ruthless interrogators left the room. The old man's evil spirit is now suspended between hell and earth. He could feel a fire burning in every part of his body. He longed for death to save him from his torment. He wished that those interrogators would come back and shoot him in the head and kill him and save him from his unbearable torment. But this desire was not fulfilled. After that, he began to feel himself plunging into a deep ocean of darkness. Darkness overtook him, and he passed away. The same 2 police guards returned and carried away the old man's corpse. Without trying to find out if he was alive or dead, the guards took his dead body to the confinement room and laid it on a hard floor. He became like a corpse ready to be buried. Illustrations describing Omar's brutal treatment and interrogation, as well as the subsequent abuse of Osman Al-Taib. These scenes involve violence, torture, and severe physical harm. 1. Omar's ordeal. A dimly lit prison corridor with 2 guards dragging a shadowy figure, emphasizing the harshness through stark contrasts of light and darkness. A broken chess piece or puppet on strings to symbolize Omar's helplessness and manipulation. A silhouette of a man sitting in a dark interrogation room with a single harsh light overhead, evoking tension without showing injuries. 2. Interrogation scene. A table with scattered papers and a glaring lamp, with looming shadows of interrogators on the wall to suggest intimidation. A symbolic depiction of trick questions as a maze or puzzle in the background, representing Omar's mental struggle. 3. Osman Al-Taib's humiliation. A toppled chair and scattered papers in a stark room, symbolizing chaos and violence. A cracked mask or broken crown to represent the fall of the wealthy, powerful old man under brutal force. 4. Final fate. A dark dungeon door with chains and shadows, conveying confinement and despair. A symbolic image of 2 wilted flowers or broken statues lying in a dim prison dorm, representing Omar and Osman's shattered bodies. Excerpts about the interrogation of the magician Omar by the police extortionists. The 6th criminal, the magician Omar, pretended to be so ill that he could neither stand nor speak. He raised his hand when he heard the 2 prison guards calling his name, Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir. Then the 2 guards approached him and ordered him to his feet. He tried to stand up, but his strength failed him. They grabbed his hands and forced him to his feet. When they let go of his hands, he spontaneously fell on his face and seriously injured himself. He had broken some of his front teeth and his forehead was also bleeding. The police guards, ignoring his injuries, turned his body over and dragged him out of the lockup room by his feet until they reached the interrogator's room. On the way, his head kept bouncing up and down like a soccer ball and hitting everything. His body, which had been severely beaten and damaged by the police interrogators at his initial detention, suffered unbearable pain. He started screaming and crying all the way. The 2 prison guards did not heed his cries. In this inhuman way, the criminal Omar was dragged for 6 minutes until they reached the police interrogator's room. After that, they handcuffed him, turned off the lights, and left. The magician Omar, being a jailbird as a habitual goon, knew what would come next. So his mind became busy devising some tricks to escape from the harsh beatings of the investigators. Moreover, he kept his eyes closed tightly. Half an hour later, he heard people's footsteps entering the darkened room. Turn on the sharp light with Omar's eyes closed. He started opening them gradually until he saw the ruthless interrogators standing in front of him like death demons. His main concern is to avoid trick questions. But they surprised him with an unexpected question. Why did you escape from prison? The first question is too tricky for Omar to answer correctly. Sir, the magician said, the police inspector Hussein told me to go home because someone asked him to release me. The investigators are not satisfied with the answer, and hence the brutal beating started immediately. Omar suffered more unbearable pain than the old man because his ailing body had not yet overcome the pain of the previous beating. He started screaming loudly. 10 minutes later, the painful beating stopped and the question was repeated. The kidnapper and rapist of the first innocent girl said while crying bitterly, "Sir, that my younger sister's husband bribed Inspector Hussein, and I was released." The answer is not acceptable because Omar is still trying to justify his escape. Therefore, the beating resumed again. When the interrogators stopped 10 minutes later, he felt as if his body had been stabbed and pierced by hundreds of sharp knives, swords, and spears. He's breathing hard now. The difficult question was asked again. My little sister's husband, who is the well-known wealthy man, Syed Osman Al-Taib, wanted me to appear before the judge of the Sharia court. If I hadn't attended the trial, he wouldn't have won the case against his disobedient Muslim wife, who is my small sister Firdaus. That's why he bribed Inspector Hussein and released me. This is no excuse for you to escape from prison. I'm sorry, sir. I will not run away again. How much money did your rich brother-in-law pay to Inspector Hussein as a bribe to get you released? It's a blank check. Inspector Hussein was told to write in it any amount of money he wished to receive. Do you admit that you are the sixth criminal, the magician Omar, the fugitive who participated in the heinous crime of kidnapping and rape that was committed against the innocent girl? Yes, I am, sir. After that, the two confession papers were brought, and he was then asked to confess that he had written and signed them. Omar also admitted that the detainee Shakash is indeed a criminal, but he did not participate in the crime of kidnapping and rape of the innocent girl, Mona. However, the police authority preferred to continue detaining Shakash as a dangerous criminal. Then the investigators inquired about Mr. Osman Al-Taib and learned from Omar that he is neither deaf nor dumb, but he suffers from a disease in the lips from a bee bite that prevents him from speaking. When they were satisfied with the confessions of the magician Omar, two of them carried his battered and broken body to the dungeon and then returned the body of the evil old monster, Mr. Osman Al-Taib, who had already been severely damaged. The old geezer who is like a zombie came out of a grave and is still alive. This time, instead of tying him up, they made the old beast sit on a chair. Then they gave him some paper and a pencil. One of the interrogators asked him, "Do you admit that you bribed Police Inspector Hussein Hassan Hassanain and thus helped the criminal Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir escape from prison?" The old man wrote the following reply. I had asked Inspector Hussein to release him for 3 days only because I needed him to testify before the Judge Abdul Mohsen Taha in the Sharia court in Gadaref City regarding my dispute with the family of my fourth wife, who is his sister Firdaus Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir. When his response was read out loud, another police interrogator responded angrily and slapped the old man. The slap was so strong that the old goat, the chair, and the table turned upside down. All these things were rearranged, and the question was repeated. The old man did not reply. So, the tough cop assumed he had become temporarily deaf from the slap. To overcome this difficulty, he wrote the question on a piece of paper and presented it to him. This time the old man wrote a satisfactory answer. Since you knew that Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir was involved in a crime of kidnapping and rape, why did you bribe Inspector Hussein and ask him to release him? When the old man read the above question, he hesitated for a moment and then wrote the following answer. I was told that he had participated in a serious crime, but I did not know what the crime was. When the answer was read aloud, the old man felt as if a cricket bat had hit his face. Therefore, everything, including the voracious hyena or the fearsome old beast, is turned upside down. This time the evil old man flew into the air and fell 2 meters away. All the turned upside down things with the old man were rearranged again. The answer has been cancelled in red ink and marked with an X, which indicates that it is a wrong answer. Accordingly, the correct and honest answer was requested. Again, a correct answer was given this time. Another trick question was asked. What was your goal when you bribed Inspector Hussein and helped a notorious criminal like the magician Omar escape from prison? The old man knew that he had already answered that question. Therefore, the first thought that occurred to him was to leave the question unanswered. So, he put the pencil on the paper and waited for the investigator's reaction. But not answering a question is considered the worst answer by these angry police interrogators. Therefore, one of them pulled the old man's right ear, another pulled his left cheek, and then they both lifted him up. When the old man was forced to his feet, both interrogators slapped him simultaneously. He felt as if his face had been hit by two large stones. He fell neither backward nor forward nor sideways, but collapsed. The interrogators lifted him and put him on the chair, but he fell again. They tried to keep him sitting on the hot chair 3 times, and each time he automatically fell to the floor. When they examined his body, they discovered that he had become deaf and blind, and that his mouth was temporarily unable to speak. He became like a statue, a body without sense. So, they carried him like an old piece of wood and threw him into the dark dungeon. The next day, the badly battered and damaged bodies of the wealthy man, Osman Al-Taib, and the magician criminal, Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir, were transferred to the doctors in the prison clinic. Without examining their corpses, which had been savagely beaten, the doctors of the clinic declared their severely damaged and rotted bodies fit for imprisonment. Therefore, their lifeless corpses were dumped like trashes into one of the crowded dorms of Al-Ghadarif City Prison. Here are examples of similar cases from the text that illustrate the effects of the police interrogation. 1. Physical collapse and sensory loss. The elderly suspect Mr. Osman Al-Taib was slapped simultaneously by 2 interrogators, causing him to collapse repeatedly. Attempts to keep him seated failed, and eventually, he became deaf, blind, and mute, a body without sense. He was then thrown into a dungeon like an object. Effect: complete physical and sensory breakdown due to extreme stress and violence. 2. Severe bodily damage and death. Osman Al-Taib and Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir were beaten so savagely during interrogation that their bodies were described as rotted and lifeless. Doctors declared them fit for imprisonment without examination, and their corpses were dumped in a crowded dorm. Effect: fatal injuries and institutional neglect following brutal interrogation. 3. Psychological and physical torture leading to coma. Osman endured prolonged beatings that left him in a comatose state for days. His condition deteriorated to the point where he could not speak, see, hear, or walk. Recovery took a week, highlighting the lasting impact of interrogation-induced trauma. Effect: extended coma and permanent physical impairment. 4. Extreme measures during the police raid. After a tip-off, gang members were captured and confessed under interrogation to kidnapping and rape. The raid instructions authorized brutality, beatings, kicks, and even lethal force, without regard for innocence or gender. Effect: institutionalized violence and coerced confessions under duress. Here are some powerful direct quotes from the text that can be used to strengthen the impact of the cases. 1. Forced marriage and courtroom horror. Furtis resisting marriage. I am not married to anyone. He is a despicable old man. Judge invoking precedent. Aisha was 6 when she got married to our Prophet Muhammad and was 9 when he consummated his marriage with her. Yet she did not hate him. Furtis retorts, maybe she hated him. Every little girl would hate the old man who forced her to bed. Verdict. I issue a verdict of obedience. She must be transferred to the House of Obedience. 2. Brutality and enforcement. 5 armed policemen dragged Firdos from home, slapped her violently. One of them threatened to rape her in broad daylight. 3. Community hostility. Intisar felt like everyone hates her now. So, she expects that people's bitterness may one day lead some to stone her to death or chase her out of town. I became like the unwanted girl or untouchable woman in Hindu society. Her girlfriends and classmates at school said Intisar is deceived by her beauty. She is like a butterfly that jumped into a fire believing that the fire would add to her beauty. 4. Love and defiance. Prove to everyone that we are inseparable lovers and not even death can set us apart. In Western countries, women have equal rights with men. There is no Islamic law or Sharia court there. Here's another detailed summary of the interrogation of Mr. Osman Al-Taib by the Gudarif City Police. Arrest and initial treatment. Mr. Osman Al-Taib was discovered hiding in a toilet during a police raid. His hands were tied, and he was forcibly taken by 2 policemen, thrown into a police wagon, and later locked up. During custody, Sergeant Muhammad Abdul Nabi slapped him violently after a misunderstanding. The sergeant accused Osman of bribing Inspector Hussein to release a criminal, the magician. Osman's inability to respond due to injuries from a previous lip bite was perceived as defiance, prompting further assault. The sergeant nearly kicked him before a nurse intervened. Brutality during police interrogation. Osman was beaten harshly during questioning, leaving him in a critical state. A medical report confirmed. He remained in a coma in ICU for several days. He suffered additional assaults by gang members inside prison and was trampled during riots, resulting in permanent disability. Recovery and aftermath. After days of immobility and near-death condition, Osman gradually regained his senses. Day 4. Vision returned. Day 5. Hearing restored. Day 6. Walked with difficulty. Day 7. Regained speech. His recovery was monitored by prison guards and a doctor before further questioning resumed. Interrogation summary expanded. The interrogations in the verdict of obedience against the Muslim wife reveal systemic coercion, patriarchal dominance, and the psychological toll on those who are accused. They oscillate between intimidation, bargaining, and emotional manipulation, underscoring the fragility of justice under authoritarian norms. 1. Coercive atmosphere. Excerpt. 5 of them. 5 men. 5 shadows. Their eyes cold, their silence heavier than chains. This opening captures the oppressive setting, an interrogation framed as punishment rather than truth-seeking. Impact. The suspect feels criminalized for defying obedience laws, signaling that the process is punitive, not investigative. 2. Bargaining and threats. Excerpt. Listen, Mr. James, you cannot ask me all these questions as if you are a police interrogator and I am a suspect. If you need easy money, then trust me and bring 4 of your good friends with you. Here, interrogation morphs into negotiation, exposing corruption and the commodification of justice. Impact. The dialogue blurs lines between legality and criminality, showing how power brokers manipulate fear and greed. 3. Gendered humiliation. Excerpt. The slap still burns. Cheek on fire, body twisted, upside down. Humiliation tastes bitter, like dust in my mouth. Physical violence becomes a tool of interrogation, reinforcing patriarchal control and silencing resistance. 4. Inspector Hussein's calculated messaging. Excerpt. Containment of defiance. Scapegoating Shakush. Justice as theater. Hussein's phone conversation with Osman Al-Taib frames interrogation as a performance, truth sacrificed for stability. Impact. This reveals the state's priority, preserving hierarchy over fairness. 5. Fear and survival. Excerpt. Intisar said with fear, I came with my police permit papers, but I lost them. Her trembling response to hostile female interrogators illustrates the peril of navigating bureaucratic traps under duress. 6. Moral ultimatums. Excerpt. Now you have to choose between me and your brother. Walid's confrontation with Badriya during questioning blends personal stakes with ethical dilemmas, intensifying emotional pressure. Key themes emerging from dialogue. Justice as theater, punishment staged for appearances, not truth. Patriarchal control, women interrogated as property, not persons. Corruption and bargaining, interrogation becomes a marketplace for favors. Psychological warfare, fear, humiliation, and moral coercion dominate exchanges. Here's a comparison of how the police interrogated Mr. Osman Al-Taib versus Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir, based on the text. Interrogation of Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jabir. Context and method. Omar was coerced into writing 2 confession papers. The first admitted his involvement in the kidnapping and rape crime. The second implicated others, stating that he was released by Inspector Hussein due to a large bribe paid jointly by Osman al-Taib and other influential figures. Tone and pressure. The process was highly coercive. Omar was forced by threats and intimidation rather than voluntary admission. Purpose. These confessions were later used as critical evidence in court. Psychological impact. Omar expressed fear and desperation, indicating that the confessions were extracted under duress rather than through standard legal questioning. Interrogation of Mr. Osman al-Taib. Context and method. Osman faced direct questioning about bribery. He was asked if he bribed Inspector Hussein to help Omar escape from prison. Initially, Osman wrote a defensive reply, claiming the bribe was only to allow Omar to testify in a Sharia court dispute. Tone and physical abuse. When his response was deemed unsatisfactory, a police interrogator slapped him violently, causing the chair and table to overturn. The question was repeated in writing when they assumed he was deaf from the slap. Outcome. Eventually, Osman wrote a satisfactory answer, acknowledging the bribery despite knowing Omar was involved in a heinous crime. Atmosphere. The interrogation was brutal, involving physical violence and humiliation, reflecting a punitive approach rather than investigative fairness. Key differences. Nature of coercion. Omar's confessions were extracted through psychological pressure and threats. Osman faced physical violence and repeated questioning until compliance. Focus of questions. Omar was pressed to admit personal guilt and implicate others. Osman was targeted for corruption and collusion with law enforcement. Role in crime. Omar was interrogated as a direct perpetrator of kidnapping and rape. Osman was interrogated as an accessory who facilitated Omar's temporary release through bribery. Here's a concise summary of Omar and Osman's interrogation based on the text. Summary of Omar and Osman's interrogation. Context. The interrogation revolves around exposing Omar's involvement in a heinous crime and the corruption that shielded him. Key accusations. Omar is confronted about his role in the kidnapping and rape of an innocent girl. He is accused of bribery and collusion with influential figures, including Osman al-Taib, to secure his release. Tone and atmosphere. The exchange is tense and hostile, filled with anger, threats, and moral conflict. Omar reacts with curses and denial when confronted about the crime and bribery. Critical revelations. The interrogator claims to have seen Omar twice, once at the brothel during the crime and later at the Sharia court where Omar lied to the judge. Osman's wealth is implicated in silencing Inspector Hussein and covering up the crime. Underlying themes. Corruption and collusion, law enforcement and elites conspiring to protect criminals. Moral conflict. The interrogator seeks justice against systemic abuse and patriarchal authority. Outcome. The interrogation exposes a network of bribery and coercion, highlighting the vulnerability of women and the abuse of religious and legal systems. The Gang of Coco is portrayed in the novel as a violent and highly organized criminal group operating both outside and inside prison. Here's a detailed description of their activities based on the text. Leadership and structure. After the arrest of Coco, the former leader, Al-Waj, assumed leadership, with Hammer Shakash as the assistant. They maintained influence through a network of loyal members and bodyguards, even while some were incarcerated. Criminal activities outside prison. Theft and armed robbery. They engaged in stealing, burglary, and violent raids. Murder and kidnapping. Targeted individuals for ransom or revenge. Sexual violence. Rape was part of their intimidation tactics. Blackmail. They plotted to exploit wealthy individuals, such as Osman al-Taib, by threatening to harm relatives. Illegal marriage and exploitation. The gang kidnapped teenage girls and forced them into brothels or sham marriages. Criminal activities inside prison. Extortion and harassment. They coerced other inmates and families for money under threat of violence. Smuggling. They trafficked cigarettes, snuff tobacco, drugs, and alcohol into prison. Violence against women and child abuse. Their influence extended to acts of brutality and exploitation within prison walls. The text provides a vivid account of the brutalities inflicted on Mr. Osman Al-Taib by the gang led by Cuckoo while he was in jail. Physical restraint and torture. For gang members, Al-Wa'ish, Shakash, Abu Shakura, and the magician held Mr. Osman by his hands and legs, stretching him like a wet cloth tied at its corners. This immobilization was the prelude to severe beating. Violent beating. Cuckoo, referred to as the son of the devil, used a long stick to cane Mr. Osman repeatedly on his back, buttocks, legs, and hands. The blows were so intense that he screamed in agony. Silencing the victim, to stop his loud cries, a dirty cloth was stuffed into his mouth, after which the beating continued unabated. Aftermath of assault. When Cuckoo exhausted his strength, the four gangsters dropped the badly battered body of Mr. Osman. He fell heavily on his face, injuring his nose. The cumulative injuries were catastrophic. His left leg was broken twice, 2 ribs shattered, skull fractured, back damaged beyond repair, and he lost all his artificial teeth. Medical consequences. These injuries left him in a prolonged coma in the ICU for several days. Later reports confirmed that he was also trampled during violent prison riots, leaving him permanently lame for life. The novel reveals that brutalities had a profound impact on both Osman's physical health and the trajectory of his legal case. Impact on Osman's health. Osman was brutally tortured in prison, beaten by gang members, and trampled during riots. These assaults left him in a prolonged coma in the ICU for over a week and ultimately caused permanent disability, lameness. His weakened state meant he was physically crippled after release, though he remained influential and vowed revenge. Impact on legal case. Medical reports documented severe beating, starvation, and repeated rape of Firdaus, Osman's fourth wife, during his absence. This evidence led to charges of kidnapping, rape, and murder against Osman. Despite overwhelming evidence, Osman was acquitted of major charges, while Harun, his servant, received 4 years for second-degree murder, and Zakia, the nurse, was acquitted. This outcome underscores systemic corruption and patriarchal bias in the justice system. The brutality Osman endured in prison did not translate into accountability. Instead, it highlighted how power and influence shielded him from conviction, even as he emerged physically broken. Here's a synthesis of the broader themes the episode illustrates, focusing on systemic injustice and patriarchal power. 1. Systemic injustice. Legalized oppression. The verdict of obedience and House of Obedience institutionalized coercion under Sudanese Sharia law, compelling women to submit to husbands or guardians. Forced marriages without consent are legitimized by courts and enforced by police. Institutional complicity. Religious authorities and judges invoke Quranic verses and hadith to justify rulings, transforming law into a tool of patriarchal control. Appeals for justice are redirected into the same oppressive framework. Corruption and collusion. Wealthy men, clerics, and state actors conspire for personal gain, using bribery and blackmail to manipulate outcomes. Police brutality and judicial bias reinforce systemic failure. Violation of human rights. Practices such as marital rape, child marriage, and apostasy punishments clash with international norms, exposing a justice system rooted in gender discrimination. 2. Patriarchal power. Male guardianship and control. Women are treated as property, sold into marriage, denied autonomy, and excluded from guardianship roles. Obedience is framed as a religious and legal duty. Gendered violence. Physical abuse, marital rape, and honor killings are normalized as disciplinary measures. Resistance is criminalized, often punished by stoning or execution. Religious justification. Patriarchal interpretations of Islamic texts sacralize inequality, portraying women as deficient and obedience as divine command. Commodification of women. Female bodies become bargaining chips in social and political deals, reinforcing their economic and sexual subjugation. 3. Intersection of religion, law, and culture. Sacralization of patriarchy. Religious doctrine is weaponized to legitimize misogyny, embedding gender hierarchy in both law and social norms. Cultural entrenchment. Honor culture and virginity control perpetuate systemic oppression, masking violence under the guise of morality. 4. Resistance and agency. Acts of defiance. Characters like Intisar and Furtus resist forced marriages, symbolizing fragile but vital assertions of dignity. Cost of resistance. Defiance triggers severe repercussions, legal threats, torture, and social ostracism, underscoring the peril of challenging entrenched norms. In essence, this novel critiques a society where obedience is enforced through law, fear, and violence, and where patriarchal power operates through a fusion of religion, culture, and state authority. It exposes how systemic injustice marginalizes women while highlighting resistance as both courageous and costly. Here's a bullet point summary of the major themes. Core themes: patriarchy and religious law. Enforcement of obedience through Sharia law and patriarchal norms. Practices such as forced marriage, polygamy, child marriage, and FGM. Women treated as property, autonomy denied. Violence against women. Systemic abuse, marital rape, honor killings, public executions. Legal and religious institutions sanction coercion and brutality. Love, resistance, and survival. Romantic love as defiance against oppressive norms. Transformation from victimhood to resilience and escape. Religious apostasy and conversion. Apostasy portrayed as a capital crime, conversion as liberation. Conflict between Islamic orthodoxy and personal freedom. Corruption and hypocrisy. Religious and political leaders exploit laws for personal gain. Public piety contrasted with private depravity. Refugee experience. Harrowing journey of exile and asylum, dangers of displacement. Freedom and autonomy. Yearning for self-determination in education, marriage, and life choices. Resistance against guardianship laws and patriarchal control. Sacrifice and suffering. Emotional and physical costs of resisting systemic oppression. Hope and despair. Oscillation between optimism and despair under oppressive systems. Social and cultural critique. Gender oppression and misogyny. Sharia rulings enforce obedience, Hukm al-Tai. Women's rights are denied under patriarchal and religious systems. Legal and judicial injustice. Courts collude with elites. Verdicts legitimize coercion. Bribery and corruption in law enforcement. Honor culture and social control. Family honor is invoked to justify forced marriages and punish dissent. Symbolism and imagery. House of obedience, legalized imprisonment and sexual slavery. Moon and Nile, hope, freedom, and transcendence. Veil/burqa, enforced invisibility and denial of female subjectivity. Letters, emotional lifeline and resistance. Supernatural, Daldum, fear and manipulation through superstition. Philosophical and spiritual reflections. Existentialist ideas and references to Sartre and Gandhi. Love is portrayed as divine, transformative, and resistant to oppression. Human rights and global commentary. Clash between Sharia rulings and international human rights norms. Criticism of global organizations' ineffectiveness in addressing abuses. Impact of interrogation. Interrogation often exerts profound psychological and emotional pressure on individuals. It can lead to feelings of vulnerability, fear, and compliance, particularly when authority is emphasized. Scholars note that such practices may distort voluntary decision-making, creating an environment where obedience is prioritized over autonomy. This dynamic can have lasting consequences on personal agency and marital relationships, as individuals may act out of coercion rather than genuine consent. Here's a draft for the interrogation impact section using paraphrased quotes from the text. Interrogation impact. The scenes of interrogation in the narrative reveal the devastating physical and psychological toll on those subjected to it. Physical breakdown. After relentless beatings in the interrogation room, Osman Al-Taib is described as barely alive, like a statue with eyes that cannot see and a mouth that cannot speak. Days of torture leave him immobile and mute, signaling the near-total destruction of his bodily functions before a slow, painful recovery begins. Humiliation and dehumanization. Firdaus's arrest and transfer to the House of Obedience is marked by deep indignity. Shackled and slapped inside a police car, she feels stripped of humanity, reduced to an object being delivered. This treatment underscores how interrogation is not just about extracting compliance, but erasing identity. Psychological collapse. The mental state of those interrogated oscillates between shock and despair. Firdaus reels from the suddenness of her arrest, her mind racing with disbelief, while isolation and fear gnaw at her spirit. Yet, amid humiliation, a flicker of defiance remains. Her inner voice insists, "You can cage my body, but you will never cage my soul." Symbolic weight. Interrogation scenes serve as a metaphor for systemic oppression. They dramatize the collision between resistance and patriarchal law, turning personal autonomy into a crime and transforming the interrogation chamber into a crucible of suffering. Here's an expanded thematic analysis of interrogation impact based on the novel, structured for clarity and depth. Why interrogation matters in the narrative. Interrogation is not portrayed as a neutral quest for truth. It becomes a ritual of domination, blending physical violence, psychological terror, and religious dogma. Its impact reverberates across character arcs, plot progression, and the novel's critique of systemic injustice. Core thematic dimensions. 1. Patriarchal power and gendered violence. Function. Interrogation enforces obedience, framing women as property under Sharia law. Impact. Victims Intisar, Firdaus are stripped of agency, humiliated, and coerced into submission. Symbolism. The interrogation room mirrors the House of Obedience. Both spaces institutionalize female subjugation. 2. Religious absolutism and moral policing. Mechanism. Judges and interrogators weaponize Quranic verses and hadith to sanctify coercion. Impact. Apostasy and resistance are reframed as sins, escalating legal disputes into moral crusades. Theme. Faith becomes a battlefield. Interrogation is a theological performance aimed at crushing dissent. 3. Psychological torture and identity crisis. Methods. Darkness, isolation, verbal abuse, and threats of hellfire amplify existential dread. Impact. Victims oscillate between despair and defiance. Intisar's suicidal ideation and later apostasy emerge from this crucible. Symbolism. Imagery of tombs and angels of death transforms interrogation into an eschatological ordeal. 4. Corruption and state violence. Dynamics. Police demand sexual favors, fabricate charges, and use torture to extract confessions. Impact. Interrogation exposes systemic rot. Law becomes an instrument of extortion rather than justice. Theme. The narrative indicts the nexus of state power, patriarchy, and religious dogma. 5. Narrative function and turning points. Catalyst. Interrogation scenes trigger major shifts, collapse of conspiracies, courtroom drama, and Intisar's transformation from victim to resistor. Foreshadowing. Brutality anticipates honor killing, riots, and societal breakdown. Arc. Moves the story from private suffering to public spectacle, culminating in mass violence and political chaos. Synthesis. Interrogation operates as a microcosm of systemic oppression, dramatizing how law, religion, and gender politics converge to perpetuate injustice. Its thematic resonance lies in power versus vulnerability, faith versus freedom, justice versus brutality, resistance versus submission. The novel reveals that the magician Omar managed to convince the gang of his loyalty through a mix of denial, reassurance, and psychological maneuvering. Denial of betrayal. Omar firmly claimed he had no role in the police ambush that led to the arrest of Shakash and Al-Wash. This was crucial because the gang suspected him of being involved in the trap. By distancing himself from the incident, he removed immediate doubts about his allegiance. Reaffirmation of loyalty. He assured the gang's bodyguards that he remained loyal to their cause. This verbal commitment was enough to restore trust temporarily, and as a result, the gang even counted him as an active member again. Handling intimidation. When Shakash delivered Alwash's message, "Loyalty is not a choice, Omar. It is obedience," Omar responded with controlled defiance. Obedience? To a man who hides in shadows? I bow to no one who fears the light. This showed confidence without outright rebellion, signaling strength rather than weakness, which gangs often respect. Understanding the power dynamics. The exchange underscored that Omar was walking a fine line. The gang demanded obedience, and Shakash warned that shadows have long arms. Omar's calculated response allowed him to appear principled yet pragmatic, avoiding immediate retaliation while maintaining his image as a strong player. In short, Omar's strategy combined denial of guilt, assertion of loyalty, and psychological resilience under threat, which convinced the gang he was still on their side. Key psychological tactics Omar might use. Reciprocity and loyalty. Omar would likely emphasize mutual benefit, helping gang members when they need support and expecting loyalty in return. This creates a sense of obligation and strengthens bonds. Shared identity and group solidarity. He might reinforce a strong us versus them mentality, framing the gang as a family. This taps into social identity theory, making members feel their personal worth is tied to group belonging. Fear and respect balance. Maintaining trust often involves a careful mix of intimidation and protection. Omar could project strength to deter betrayal while showing fairness and reliability to earn respect. Consistency and predictability. By being consistent in decisions and punishments, Omar reduces uncertainty. Predictability fosters psychological safety, which is crucial for trust in high-risk environments. Symbolic gestures and rituals. Using rituals, codes, or symbolic acts, e.g., shared language, initiation rites, reinforces cohesion and signals commitment, making members feel part of something larger. Information control. Omar might limit sensitive information to trusted circles, creating exclusivity. This scarcity of knowledge increases perceived value and loyalty among those included. Emotional manipulation. Leveraging guilt, pride, or fear of exclusion can keep members aligned. For example, praising loyalty publicly while shaming disloyalty privately strengthens conformity. Here are some clear examples of Omar's tactics in the story, based on the text. 1. Exploiting legal guardianship. Omar uses his position as Inasar's male guardian under Sudanese Sharia law to override her wishes and her mother's objections. He marries Inasar off to Hassan without her knowledge or consent, exploiting a legal loophole that allows a guardian to act without the woman's presence. This is a calculated move to prevent her from marrying Sami, whom she truly loves. 2. Collusion and corruption. He conspires with Hassan and corrupt religious figures, such as an imam, to legitimize the forced marriage. Omar also forges confession papers and colludes with officials to cover up his actions, showing his reliance on systemic corruption. 3. Intimidation and patriarchal rhetoric. Omar uses intimidation and religious rhetoric to justify his control, reinforcing patriarchal norms. His behavior creates fear and isolates Intisar socially, making resistance harder. 4. Alliance with powerful figures. He forms alliances with influential men like Osman al-Taib and Majub al-Halali, enabling him to evade accountability and participate in schemes involving sham marriages and bribery. 5. Self-serving motives. Omar's actions are driven by greed, lust, and rivalry. He prioritizes personal gain over justice, even at the expense of his sisters' lives and dignity. 6. Manipulation and threats. He manipulates situations to maintain control, including threatening violence and leveraging his criminal reputation to silence opposition, despite being physically weak. Omar's tactics shape the story's themes by embodying systemic corruption and patriarchal oppression. Here's how. 1. Reinforcement of patriarchal authority. Omar exploits his position as the legal male guardian under Sharia law to force marriages and control women's lives. This manipulation underscores the theme of gender inequality, showing how cultural and religious structures are weaponized to deny women autonomy. 2. Corruption and moral decay. His involvement in bribery, forging confessions, and collusion with officials illustrates a society where justice is compromised for personal gain. These actions amplify the novel's critique of systemic corruption and the fragility of legal institutions. 3. Cowardice behind brutality. Although feared for his criminal reputation, Omar is portrayed as physically weak, revealing a hollow core beneath his violent persona. This irony deepens the theme of hypocrisy, power sustained by fear rather than strength or morality. 4. Contrast with Walid. Omar's predatory power is set against Walid's moral resistance, creating a thematic tension between coercion and conscience. Their opposition highlights the struggle between integrity and corruption, framing the narrative as a battle for justice in a fractured society. Omar's tactics drive the story's central themes of patriarchal control, corruption, and moral conflict. Patriarchal authority. Omar uses his role as male guardian under Sharia law to force marriages and control women, reinforcing systemic gender oppression. Corruption and self-interest. His reliance on bribery, forged confessions, and collusion with officials exposes a society where justice is traded for power. Hypocrisy and fragility. Though feared for brutality, Omar is depicted as physically weak, revealing the emptiness behind his dominance. Thematic contrast. His predatory behavior contrasts with Walid's moral resistance, amplifying the novel's critique of coercion versus conscience and the struggle between integrity and corruption. Excerpts about the encounter of the magician Omar with the gang of Cuckoo inside the jail. The number of dangerous bodyguards inside Al-Ghadarif Central Prison increased by 2 after the arrest of the fugitive gang leader, Alwash al-Ajabo, and the Gorilla Man, the Hammer Shakash Wad al-Haram. Before that, there were 17 bodyguards led by a notorious criminal named Koko Wad al-Shaitan. When the apprehended ringleader the Beast Man Alwash entered the prison, he bowed to his old gang leader, Koko, the son of Satan. In reality, the two were a ringleader and his assistant before Koko was arrested 7 years ago and sentenced to life in prison. After his arrest, the Beast Alwash became the leader of the gang and Hammer Shakash his assistant. Together, the trio worked outside of prison for robbery, murder, kidnapping, rape, and armed robbery. From the inside, their activities continued in the form of extortion, harassment, and smuggling of cigarettes, snuff tobacco, drugs, and alcoholic beverages inside the prison. One day these 19 bodyguards came together to lay out their evil plots, and Koko, the son of Satan, was sitting in the middle surrounded by his gangsters. From Shakash the Hammer, the gang learned that the magician Omar has switched sides and sold him and his monstrous leader Alwash to the sniffer dogs. By the way, the gang calls every police officer of the community dog. According to the report of the Gorilla Man, as soon as he left his house, the traitor magician Omar called the police and reported his whereabouts. So, Police Inspector Hussein arrested Shakash and falsely accused him of the crime of the hiding magician. All members of the gang agreed to execute the traitor, the magician known as Omar Ibrahim Mustafa Jaber. Before carrying out the death penalty, the gang decided to use him to blackmail his rich son-in-law. Therefore, the main topic of the meeting is to devise a plan to blackmail the wealthy business tycoon, Mr. Osman Al-Taib. Why don't we kidnap Badriya, the magician's sister, and force him to pay a ransom, otherwise we will rape and kill her, suggested the Gorilla Man. Alwash said that this may not work because the man who sold his leader would not hesitate to betray his sister as well. A man like him could sell his sister as a wife or slave to another man if he paid him the appropriate price for her slavery and rape. The Hammer said, "Let us kidnap the wizard Omar himself and threaten his rich son-in-law that we will kill him if he does not pay a huge ransom for his release." Alwash said that such an idea is also not good, and he added, "I believe that the rich man bribed the police inspector and released the magician, not because he loved him, for there is no person who loves a criminal except a fellow criminal like him. I think the rich man did it because of his reputation in the community. For him, the death of his brother-in-law, the sorcerer Omar, would be a great relief. Then the rich man's wife or daughter would be the right choice, said Hammer. It's an incredibly good idea, says the devil's son, Coco, but unfortunately all our best men are here. Our men outside the prison may not be able to handle the kidnapping and extortion plan. Alwash said, I have a good idea. Let's send one of our men to the magician Omar to force him to write a confession of his involvement in the crime of kidnapping, rape, and bribery, which acquitted him. Then we'll use the confession papers to blackmail the rich man. Brilliant idea, said Coco Wad al-Shaitan. When the bodyguards plotted their plan to blackmail the magician Omar and Mr. Osman al-Taib, the door of the dorm suddenly opened, and the prison guards brought 2 human corpses and quickly threw them away and disappeared. They have shut the door hurriedly because the jail guards won't risk their next trespassing on the bodyguards' territory. The gangsters looked at the 2 corpses for some time and concluded that the dead bodies were brought in by the community dogs in order to accuse them later in court of murdering them. So, they're about to engage in an uproar and protest, but Coco ordered Shakash the Hammer to check the 2 bodies first. The gorilla man approached the bodies and used his legs to examine them. He kicked the first body until it turned over. It is found to be the body of an old man, but his face does not show whether he is alive or dead. Then he turned the second corpse over, and when he saw its face, he jumped back and shouted loudly that the jail escapee, the traitor Omar, had been caught by the dogs. All the bodyguards ran towards the body and surrounded it. For some time, they looked at him with contradictory feelings, mixed with bitterness and pity. Then their leader Coco Wad al-Shaitan opened his mouth and said sarcastically that this will be the end of all of you cooperating with the police dogs. Alwash said sarcastically, it is true, the saying that if your finger becomes a policeman, cut it off from your hand, and then throw it into the fire and burn it into ashes. Our master, Coco, the son of the devil, do you want me to wipe this traitor out of existence? Shakash shouted angrily. The son of Satan said, do not kill him. We want him to extort his son-in-law, the rich man. But he could die at any moment. The monster shouted, we must save his life. Who is the old man that brought with him? Asked the gorilla man. The beast said that his face had been disfigured by the beating of the dogs. Perhaps the 2 were arrested on the same charge, Shakash said. Whatever the charges against them, Coco Wad al-Shaitan said, we must save their lives and discover later their relationship and crimes. Accordingly, the bodyguards benefited from every available medicine that they smuggled into the prison. On top of that, there is a doctor who was recently arrested for a secret abortion he performed on a teenage girl who had conceived an illegitimate child before marriage. The girl claimed that she was raped by her uncle, but she could not prove the crime of rape, and therefore the Sharia court ruled that she be stoned to death. This doctor admitted in court that he had performed hundreds of abortions on unmarried girls who bore illegitimate children. Based on his confession of his crime, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor. The gang forced him to treat the old man and the magician. The gang of Coco agreed to protect Mr. Osman al-Taib inside prison through a secret extortion deal. According to the text, Coco's gang, described as ruthless bodyguards, made an arrangement with Al-Sheikh Al-Ghani that required Mr. Osman al-Taib to pay a large sum of money for medical treatment provided by the gang. In addition, he committed to paying a substantial monthly fee for his safety and protection within the prison dorms. After this agreement was struck, the gang treated him well and ensured his security inside the prison environment. Osman accepted the protection deal because he was left with no real choice for survival inside prison. The gang led by Cuckoo controlled the environment and made it clear that refusal would result in relentless torture. Initially, Osman resisted and tried to challenge their authority, but after being beaten severely, he agreed to pay a large sum monthly for his safety and protection. This arrangement also included covering the cost of medical treatment he had received from the gang. Once he complied, the gang treated him well, which reinforced his decision to accept the deal as a means to avoid further violence and secure some measure of security in a hostile setting. Osman's choices in the narrative vividly illustrate coercion and survival as intertwined themes. Coercion. Osman embodies patriarchal authority, repeatedly asserting that women are born to obey. His insistence on obedience and his use of physical and sexual violence against Firdas reflect systemic coercion. The verdict of obedience, imposed by the Sharia court, and Osman's actions, tying her up, beating her, and forcing sexual acts, show how legal and social structures collude to strip women of agency. His behavior is not just personal cruelty, but a manifestation of institutionalized control, where resistance is criminalized and submission enforced. Even when Osman faces interrogation later, his fear of brutal treatment by police and other inmates underscores how coercion operates at multiple levels. He is trapped in a system that demands compliance, whether in marriage or in prison. Survival. Furdas's violent act of strangling Osman is framed as a desperate survival strategy. Every legal, social, and familial avenue has failed her, leaving physical resistance as her only option. Her words, "I was not born to obey. I was born to live freely." Survival here is not just physical but existential, a fight for dignity and autonomy. Osman's own later choices, such as fearing gang violence and police torture, reveal his instinct to survive within a corrupt system. His dilemma, whether to confess or resist, shows that survival often demands moral compromise, even for those who once wielded power. In essence, Osman's coercive control sets the stage for Furdas's rebellion, while his later vulnerability exposes the fragility of power when survival becomes paramount. Both arcs critique a society where life is negotiated through force, fear, and desperate acts. The text reveals that the gang led by Kuku made a coercive arrangement with Mr. Osman Al-Taib while he was imprisoned. The terms of this deal were: initial payment for medical treatment. Mr. Osman Al-Taib was required to pay a large sum of money to cover the medical treatment provided to him by the gang inside the prison. Monthly payments for protection. He agreed to pay a substantial amount every month to ensure his safety and protection within the prison dorms. The gang positioned themselves as bodyguards, claiming authority and power inside the prison. Enforcement through violence. When Mr. Osman initially resisted, the gang beat him severely until he complied and accepted the financial arrangement. The gang made it clear that refusal would result in merciless torture day and night. In short, the deal was essentially an extortion scheme, large upfront payment plus ongoing monthly payments in exchange for protection and avoidance of harm. Excerpts about the deal of the Gang of Kuku made with Mr. Osman Al-Taib inside the jail. On the next day, the convicted doctor declared the two men fit to speak to. When the gangsters tried to interrogate the old man, they discovered that he had become temporarily deaf and mute. But they come to know from the magician that the old man is his rich brother-in-law who paid a huge bribe to the corrupt police inspector Hussein and cleared him of the crime of kidnapping and rape of the first innocent girl Mona. The old man's enemies had learned of the bribery and reported it to the police authority. As for the ambush set up by the police, which caused the arrest of Shakash and Al-Wash, the magician Omar somehow convinced the bodyguards that he had no hand in that trap. Moreover, he assured them that he was still loyal to the gang. Accordingly, the number of Kuku's gang increased that day by one member. Meanwhile, the evil conspirator, kidnapper, and rapist of the second innocent girl Firdas, the evil old geezer Al-Sayed Osman Al-Taib, remained in his physical incapacity for 3 days. The harsh beatings he was subjected to in the interrogation room almost turned him into a lifeless corpse. He became like a statue. He has a mouth, but cannot speak. He has eyes, but he cannot see. He has ears, but he cannot hear. He has teeth, but he cannot eat. And he has legs, but he cannot walk. Every prisoner who saw him concluded that the old jackal would die at any moment. However, on the 4th day, the devil's firstborn began to regain his senses one by one. On the 4th day, he began to see the prison and the prisoners, and what he saw was his abhorrence. On the 5th day, he began to hear, and what he heard he did not like. On the 6th day, he walked around with great difficulty. On the 7th day, the evil old man miraculously began to speak. The bodyguards watched his recovery with pleasure and waited impatiently until the imprisoned doctor declared him fit to speak with him. During those 7 days, the chief of the bodyguards, Koko Wad al-Shaitan, ordered his gang not to touch or speak to the rich old man. So, the old wolf was treated as kindly as the place where he landed could allow. On the 7th day, Koko the son of Satan gathered his men in a corner of the dorm and then ordered 2 of them to bring the rich old man in for a confidential and private conversation. The 2 criminals brought the old hyena and presented him to their chief. He was then made to sit in a semicircle created by the gangsters. "Listen," Koko said in a rough ogre voice to the old man. "We're glad you're in prison. When the dogs brought you here, you were half dead. You were deaf, dumb, blind, and lame when your beaten body was dumped into this dungeon by the dogs of society. You were a body without senses. You were like an expired corpse or half-dead stray dog or a homeless beggar. We saved your life. We did for you what we weren't meant to do. We made you see, hear, talk, and walk again. Without our loving care, treatment, and kindness, you might be dead and buried in a grave by now. So, we want to make a fair deal with you. We will not charge you much, but just according to the market price. This prison is for me and my men. We are known as bodyguards and bouncers. Those police dogs have no power or control inside this dorm. We are the only force and authority here. If you accept our financial bargain and pay us regularly and justly, you will live in peace between us. We will take care of you and will not let anyone harm you. But if you refuse to obey and not pay us, we will beat you mercilessly daily as long as you are here. So first you have to pay for our treatment, and then we will determine how much you have to pay every month to protect you in this prison as your bodyguards." The old man heard these words without believing his ears. Being a miser businessman, he was not used to giving his money without expecting a profit in return. Moreover, he is not convinced of the absolute power that the leader of the gang claimed to have in prison. That is why he said to him, "Above all, I did not ask you and your men to spare my life. You did it of your own free will. However, I am incredibly grateful to you for what you have done for me. Maybe when I get out of this shitty place, I'll give each of you a little gift as a token of appreciation. In terms of protection inside the prison, I don't need your protection. I am a man of great wealth and influence in society and can take care of myself. I can buy all the police authorities with my money." Koko Wad al-Shaitan did not expect the old man to refuse his request. So being a left-handed man, he raised his hand, which was the size of a cricket bat, and then hit the old man's face with full force. The old geezer felt as if he had been slapped by a lion. As a result, he was turned upside down and his body was thrown 2 meters away. Koko got to his feet immediately, and all the bodyguards stood with him. He cried like an angry beast and said, "Lift up this old crook to teach him a hard lesson." His order was immediately carried out by 4 gangsters, and they happened to be Al-Waish, Shakash, Abu Shakura, and the magician. The traitor Omar abandoned his alleged son-in-law and took the side of his gang. Therefore, he does not care if Koko Wad al-Shaitan will beat Mr. Osman al-Taib to death or flay his body while he is alive. Then they brought the old man before their angry ringleader. This is how the evil old man is raised. Al-Waish and Shakash hold his hands, and Abu Shakura and the magician hold his legs. Then they stretched him like a piece of wet cloth attached to its 4 corners to dry. By that time, the son of the devil Koko brought his long stick and started caning the old man on his back, buttocks, legs, and hands. The beating was so painful that the old man started screaming loudly. To prevent the loud screaming, Koko asked one of his men to insert a dirty cloth into the stubborn old man's mouth. The order was executed and the screaming stopped immediately, but the beating continued. When Koko's strength was exhausted, he asked his men to abandon the old man's body. The 4 bodyguards released the body, and the evil old geezer fell heavily on his face. His nose is the first organ to hit the hard ground, followed by the teeth and forehead. So his nose, mouth, and forehead started to bleed copiously. It is a very painful experience for the despicable old man. From shoulders to feet, his body is burning with fire. He could neither cry nor scream, but started rolling on the ground like a snake. The bodyguards surrounded him, and whenever he reached one of them, he kicked him like a soccer ball. Then Coco ordered his beastly assistant to knock the old man with his stick. The dangerous beast Alwash preferred to strike him on the soles of his feet. Therefore, he ordered 5 gangsters to lift the old man up. This is how they carried him. 2 of them pressed his shoulders and hands to the ground. 2 raised his 2 feet. The 5th one sat on his back and pressed his stomach to the ground. Then the old man's shoes were taken off his feet. The angry beast took the same stick from Coco, the son of Satan, and began to beat the old wolf on his bare feet. The old man started screaming like a man who had fallen into the hands of Boko Haram terrorists. So, the dirty cloth was again inserted into his mouth. He began to fight for his release, but his efforts were in vain. At that time of torture and unbearable pain, the old man once again remembered the second innocent girl, Furtus. How she begged for mercy, and he did not have mercy on her. He understood the evil he had done to her, and which the just God now demanded of him. For all this, the wicked old man did not repent of his many sins. The monster beast man kept hitting him until he ran out of energy. Therefore, he stopped and told his men to release him. When they released him this time, his body remained motionless. Finally, Coco, the son of the devil, asked his men to carry the half-dead body of the stubborn old geezer and throw it into one of the dirty toilets. When the bodyguards came to fetch the wicked old man's body a few hours later, they found him crawling like an old snake out of the smelly toilet. They seized the badly hammered body and presented it before their angry ringleader. The bodyguards surrounded his body again and waited for further orders from their commander. "Do you still think you can protect yourself from us?" Coco Wad al-Shaitan shouted angrily. The old man said in a low voice, "Please don't kill me, sir. We don't kill people here. We torture them, and this is worse than killing. Please don't torture me again. Are you ready for the deal, or do we continue to torture you?" "I am ready." When Coco Ibn Iblis heard those promising words, he ordered his men to sit down and relax. Then he brought a paper and a pen and told the wealthy old man to write down what he was going to tell him. 2 gangsters helped the old serpent sit up, supporting his back against the wall. "I, Mr. Osman Al-Taib, authorize Mr. Harun Abkar Jabrin to withdraw the amount written in a separate check attached to this letter of authorization. The same gentleman would come every month to withdraw a fixed sum of money by a check which I would issue regularly. Please do not hinder or delay him." After the old man had set the date and signed the authorization letter, Coco forced him to write a similar letter to his female secretary to get his checkbook. "Dear Miss Shyness Jamil, greetings with dripping of love. I lost my checkbook. Would you please send me another checkbook with the bearer of this letter, the Honorable Mr. Harun Abkar Jabrin?" Then above note was then dated and signed by the rich old man, and the 2 authorization letters were smuggled out of the prison by a janitor. A day later, the same messenger brought the checkbook. Then the son of Satan and his gang made a deal with the wealthy business magnate. According to the deal, the suspect Mr. Osman Al-Taib has to pay a large sum of money for the medical treatment given to him by the ruthless gang of Kuka, the son of Satan, the devil, inside the prison. Moreover, he agreed to pay a large sum every month for his safety and protection inside the dorm of the bodyguards. After this deal, the gangsters treated the wicked old man, Mr. Osman Satan Al-Taib, well inside the prison.